that yes, it's possible to maintain all this equipment consistent with the times and costs that we told you could. For reliability demonstration, we'll typically be on a test track or a isolated section of revenue track, and we'll run the trains. And they'll start off by running the trains for a limited set, maybe 5,000 miles without passengers on them, and then we can move on to running them in revenue service. And there'll be a 24-month typically demonstration period where the customer or my client, the supplier, is liable for any design changes that might be necessary if the trains do not achieve the reliability requirements.
Okay.
Sorry, I know that was kind of a lot.
No, these are a lot of great points, and guess I'll discuss the ones that stand out. And so
Okay.
you talked about corrective action, and sometimes you said that you have to introduce other best practices to reduce costs while making sure that the project, the project is meets the client's requirements. So can you talk about some of the major improvements that you introduced to reduce the cost of the design changes?
So, for example, right now we're dealing with one of my client suppliers has provided reliability analyses that show the system they're providing does not meet the specified reliability requirement for that system. So we worked with that supplier, and their position was it would cost too much. They would have to pass the cost on to my client. So I'm sorry, my dogs are barking for a second. I apologize. Anyways, the supplier would have to pass the cost of the design change off to my client. And my client did not want to bear that cost, of course, and it was going to be a significant expense. So I helped my client work with the customer to come to an agreement that as long as we did not miss the target significantly and we had other systems that could share their reliability budget, we wouldn't have to make a significant design change that would cost my client that much money. So at the end of the day, my client did not have to pay for a design change because we were able to find a solution and common ground with our customer.
Okay, awesome. And would you be able to quantify the cost savings that this led to?
I personally don't know. They did not share that information with me. It was just in my position. They just told me it would be cost prohibitive. So on the scale of $175 million railcar procurement, if I had to ballpark it, probably would have been a $5 million change for that particular system.
Okay. And which project is this initiative related to?
That was for the RTM project.
I see. And can you elaborate on the difference between your client and your customer? By customer, do you mean the end customer?
Yes, I'm sorry. I know I was reading through your questions, and I know it can come off as confusing sometimes, at least from where I sit. I always refer to the entity that I am working for, I look at as my client, because my client, typically when I'm working for a private business as opposed to an operating authority, they are supplying something to a customer, the customer being the operating authority.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So if I work for a company building trains, we have to consider the customer who is buying the trains in the equation. So I feel it can be confusing to call my client my customer. but I also see how it's confusing the other way too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. And while developing these RAM programs, what kind of testing and analysis do you perform? Does it differ from project to project?
So, in working on the side of a client who is a private customer supplying something to an operating authority, we have a technical specification that has certain deliverables specified that we must complete. In general, that includes a reliability maintained or a RAM's program plan. And this is just so with the reliability maintainability, it'd be a reliability maintainability allocation, reliability and maintainability analysis. Occasionally there's a life cycle cost analysis, and there's a reliability maintainability demonstration. The reliability and maintainability are relatively simple compared to the safety side of things.
I see. And can you think of any process improvement initiatives that you might have led for any of your projects?
Process improvement initiatives. Yeah, so internally at my company, we're a small company. We don't have much infrastructure, but I led the push to get our company started with a project management tool. It's a very simple one, but we hadn't been using any and we've been managing all of our projects by email. So I didn't think that would work all that well. I didn't like how it was working, so I led the push to get us involved with it. It's a spreadsheet-based web app called Smartsheet, but it's proven very effective for our company. On other projects, one good example I can think of is I led the development for the California High-Speed Rail project, a policy to align the asset management and RAM programs because there's many common threads between them and they were completely disaggregate. So for example, in the RAM program, we really do need an accounting of every asset that impacts the reliability or maintainability of the railroad because we need to know what the ultimate effect is of each of those assets. We know how reliable and maintainable are they, what is their roll-up impact on the overall project. So if you have individual components that roll up into a system, that roll up into the whole railroad, they all play into how often is a train going to be late, which is my ultimate concern. And asset management needs an accounting of all of those components because they're looking at them from a operations and maintenance perspective where, well, we need to maintain these components. We need to know how much they cost. We need to track them for budget purposes. So if we both need to use if we need the same information to start, and if they're looking at maintaining those things and I'm looking at how maintainable are they and are they meeting their maintainability requirements, there's a lot of synergy there. So I worked with the management of that project to develop a policy that would help us align, which admittedly my company didn't continue to work on that project much longer than that. But my understanding from keeping in touch with people on the project was that it worked out quite well.
And was this initiative specifically related to the California High-Speed Rail project?
It was at a program level for that project, yeah. So it was working with the operating authority or eventual operating authority to develop that asset management and RAM policy. So on the California High-Speed Rail project, my role as a consultant for the operating authority was not to work to comply with the RAM requirements, but to actually establish what those RAM requirements were, so that eventually those contractors that would build the railroad would have to comply with the requirements that I helped establish.
Yeah, let's see. And I assume the consolidation of these two operations can be implemented in other projects as well, right? Would you happen to know why this project was, terminated?
The project was not terminated. It, it was a dispute between the president of my company and over some accounting issues and the project. So I had nothing. It was over my head, and I think it was personally somewhat stupid, but that's not my place. So
Yeah, that's unfortunate because it seems pretty great that you were able to, identify these similarities between the two operations and were able to consolidate them.
yeah, I really wanted to see how that played out in person, because I think there was, again, lots of synergy, much increased potential for efficiency, but I just never got to follow it through. It's very regrettable that that's the case, but again, it was not in my control.
Yeah,
I sat through
but
many, too many, what are they called? Never mind. Anyways, sorry.
no problem. And but ultimately, you said that the internal personnel were pleased with the project and they said that it had potential.
Yeah, they informed me that there was much more interaction between the two programs after that policy was implemented, and the people that I know that were involved were very happy with how it worked out.
See. Okay. Mm.
It's something I'd like to implement in more projects, but I've not had the opportunity. I've not had the same type of position in other projects since then. So it's been harder to influence that type of decision making.
I see. Okay. And while leading these projects, did you have to comply with any governmental or environmental rules or regulations?
Yes. So the governmental and environmental rules and regulations, the governmental largely applies to safety, and the environmental largely applies to an aspect of the work I do that we haven't really discussed yet, which is electromagnetic compatibility. The safety aspect is basically the government says, well, with railroads, it's the Federal Railroad Administration, and they just want to make sure that it's an accounting purpose for them, where they look at your safety documentation and say, it looks like you've been thorough. Now you can't say we didn't check if something bad happens. But we do have to comply with a certain set of standards, 49 CFR 242 or something like that. And it's a pretty extensive set of rules, though. And then for environmental, we have to comply with electromagnetic compatibility rules and standards. And these largely are to make sure that I work almost exclusively with electrified railroads. And it's to make sure that the equipment that you're providing that is operating on a certain right of way does not interfere with other people's electromagnetic communications. So you can't interfere with somebody's cell phone, you can't interfere with a radio station broadcast. And also to make sure that it doesn't expose people to excessive amounts of electromagnetic radiation. So there's very little effect that's been proven on that, but still the government is very conservative and cautious about that. So want to make sure that there's a certain level of electromagnetic radiation that people are not exposed to, especially for people who have implanted medical devices. So if you
Yeah.
have a pacemaker, you might be particularly unhappy if you wander into an area along this train right of way that has higher than allowable electromagnetic radiation, because if it caused your pacemaker to fail, you could die.
Mm. Okay. So now I'm going to move on
I'm
to
sorry.
your projects, if that's okay with
Could
you.
you, could you pardon me for 1 second while I tell my dogs to be quiet?
Yeah, no problem.
All right, thank you. Very sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem at all. So
Okay, you were saying?
I was saying that I'm going to move on to your projects now, if that's okay with you.
Of course, yes.
So we already talked a little bit about the California High-Speed Rail project, about you consolidating the two operations. So can you talk about the project in general?
Yeah, so the project in general, my role specifically was the RAM program manager. I started working on that project in 2012. It was actually one of the first projects I worked on starting this new career. And I helped to develop the program-wide RAM and EMC programs. And I also worked to evaluate, at least from those I could get a hold of them, evaluate the performance of other high-speed rail programs around the world, find the differences and the similarities between what we plan in California, and to identify what level of RAM performance we could achieve. And by RAM performance, I mean the real. I saw you ask a question about KPIs. The key performance indicator that we were really working towards was on-time arrival. In the view of myself, and I think it's well-founded enough, you get on a train, the two things you care probably most about are you didn't get hurt and you got there on time. Also, other things I've had, I get involved in are your cell phone works. So I personally like to think that my role is making the customer happy at the end of the day. But going back to the KPI, we looked at the level of on-time arrival achieved by other high-speed rail systems around the world, and then we found a way to determine what we should shoot for, given our specific set of circumstances, including everything from the type of technologies that we planned on using to the geography that we had to deal with. And we came to settle on a target that was agreeable by the program management, and that's what we went forward with. From that point, we took that overall railroad level on-time arrival target and we allocated it down to different systems, and also different segments, because the project is being built in several phases. So the first operational phase would have a target that was significantly higher because there was less pieces of the puzzle moving. And then as you added more pieces, you get a lower overall target because the complexity increases. But also we need to consider how much does the traction power system or the train control system need to contribute to that overall target. And when we go and finally get suppliers, what are we going to tell them they need to achieve when they're providing equipment? So we broke down the high level on-time arrival target to segment by segment OTA targets. And then from there, we went to specific reliability and maintainability targets, which include mean time between failures for components, mean time between service failures for failures of certain systems and components that would cause a train to be delayed, and then our mean time to restore service, which was how long, once the train is delayed, does it take you to get back up and running. And we all went all the way down to individual components and systems from a railroad level. So we really understood at the end of the day how this all comes together and what we need to do to make sure that we achieve those high-level goals when we're going out to suppliers and telling them you need to meet this. One thing that was new, I mean, that type of activity has been done in this industry before. One thing that was new was applying these RAM procedures or processes to civil infrastructure, the concrete, the bridge structures, and the foundation for the track. And to my knowledge, nobody's ever really done that before. Typically, at least not in the U.S. Typically, concrete structures such as a bridge are treated as the same as a highway. So every civil contractor understands how to build a highway bridge. They've done it 100 times. But we were building a high-speed rail